The historical reality of the Americas during the first century is a subject that demands a bold and fearless examination of the facts without any sugar-coating or convenient myths. Long before America was even called America, indigenous peoples absolutely existed during the time of Jesus Christ, but they had no known contact with him or the old world civilizations of that era. When we break this down clearly and look at the actual evidence, it becomes obvious that while religious narratives might suggest otherwise, the physical record tells a very different story. By the time Jesus lived, which was roughly 4 BCE to 30 CE, the Americas were already home to incredibly rich and diverse established civilizations that had been thriving for at least 15,000 to 20,000 years. These were not primitive groups waiting to be discovered by the outside world. Instead, these populations consisted of early ancestors of the Maya civilization in Central America, who were already developing complex systems of mathematics and astronomy alongside the Hopewell culture in what is now the United States Midwest, known for their massive earthworks and trade networks. In the Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones were establishing their own unique way of life, while numerous other tribal nations across North and South America maintained their own distinct languages, spiritual beliefs, and sophisticated social systems. These people had deep knowledge of the land and complex architecture that proved they were fully realized societies. However, there is absolutely no credible historical or archaeological evidence that these people in the Americas had any awareness of Jesus Christ, the Roman Empire, or any other Old World civilizations at that time. The geographical reality is that the Americas and the Old World, which includes Europe, Asia, and Africa, were completely isolated from each other until much later in human history. Large-scale contact did not occur until over 1,400 years after the life of Jesus. While some might point to the Norse exploration, led by Leif Erikson around 1000 CE, that contact was extremely limited and did not change the global landscape. It was not until the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492 that sustained interaction began between these two worlds. We must also address the claims made by certain belief systems, such as those tied to the Book of Mormon, which suggest that Jesus visited the Americas after his resurrection. From a mainstream historical and scientific standpoint, there is no archaeological evidence, and there are no independent historical records to support such a claim. Historians do not consider these accounts verified because they lack any physical or contemporary written proof from the cultures living here at that time. The bottom line is that indigenous peoples were already thriving across the Americas during the lifetime of Jesus, and they developed entirely independently with no known connection to him or the biblical world. Human history did not start with Europe or the Middle East. It is a global and deep story that is interconnected in ways that do not require the insertion of old-world religious figures to be valid or significant. We have to respect the factual timeline of these ancient nations who built their worlds without outside influence. They were the masters of this continent long before any ships arrived from the East, and their history stands on its own as a testament to human resilience and intelligence. The historical record of the United States is not a matter of opinion or a partisan debate, but a documented series of events that show exactly how power has been distributed and used. When we talk about white supremacy, we are talking about a specific belief system that claims one group of people is inherently superior and should dominate all aspects of society. This ideology was not just a collection of personal thoughts, but was built directly into the legal and economic foundations of this country to ensure that certain groups remained in power while others were systematically oppressed. It is a bold and fearless truth that white supremacists were not the victims in American history, because the entire system was designed by them to benefit them at the expense of everyone else. From the very beginning, these power structures were created to favor landowning white men while causing immense and lasting harm to others. We have to look at the key realities of our past without any sugarcoating or historical revisionism. Millions of Africans were forcibly brought to these shores and enslaved for generations to build the wealth of this nation under a system of total dehumanization. Indigenous nations were systematically removed from their ancestral lands through state-sanctioned violence and horrific policies like the Trail of Tears. Even after the end of slavery, segregation and racist laws were enforced for over a century to maintain racial inequality and ensure that the progress of Black Americans was constantly undermined. The systems that were eventually challenged during the Civil Rights Movement were never intended to be fair. They were created specifically to maintain an unfair advantage. In modern times, there is a narrative that suggests efforts to address these deep inequalities or changes in our culture are somehow a form of oppression against white people. However, it is essential to understand the difference between losing an exclusive advantage and actually being oppressed. Losing a systemic privilege is not the same thing as being a victim of historical injustice. While any individual, regardless of their background, can experience personal hardship or specific instances of discrimination, the system of white supremacy itself was never designed to harm the people it was built to elevate. The bottom line is that the historical record is clear. White supremacist systems were the creators of victims rather than being the victims themselves. Those who suffered under these structures were primarily Black Americans, indigenous peoples, and other marginalized groups who were denied basic rights and safety for centuries. Acknowledging this fact is not about being divisive, it is about being honest so that we can understand the world as it actually exists. The historical reality of human atrocities is not a matter of debate or personal opinion, because the evidence is absolute and documented through centuries of records and physical proof. We must start with an important reality check that is bold and fearless, because sugar-coating these truths only serves those who wish to hide from them. Slavery in the United States absolutely happened, and its legacy is still felt in our systems today. The Holocaust was a documented genocide that resulted in the systematic murder of millions, and it is a fact supported by overwhelming evidence from historians' archaeological findings and the direct testimony of survivors. Likewise, the large-scale killing and displacement of indigenous peoples throughout the Americas is a well-documented historical truth that cannot be erased by modern narratives. Denying these events is not a legitimate historical position, but is instead a form of historical denialism that seeks to rewrite the past to suit a specific current agenda. It is important to ask why some people, especially within certain political subsets, feel the need to make these false claims. One of the main drivers is a feeling of losing status as the country becomes more diverse and conversations about historical inequality grow louder. Some individuals feel they are being personally blamed or that they are losing their place in society, which can turn into a false victim narrative even though they are not a historically oppressed group. This is often fueled by misinformation and echo chambers found in partisan media ecosystems, where conspiracy theories and the downplaying of atrocities are used to rewrite history until the lies start to feel like the truth. For many, accepting these historical facts feels like a threat to their identity, because if these events are true, then they feel tied to something terrible. Instead of sitting with that discomfort, they choose to deny or minimize the facts as a psychological defense. This is also used as a deliberate political strategy by certain figures to mobilize people through fear and resentment by claiming that they are the real victims now or that history is fake. This often stems from confusing a systemic critique with a personal attack. When people hear a critique of a system like racism, they interpret it as a personal accusation, which triggers a defensive rejection of the entire conversation. We must ground ourselves in the truth that while a person can feel anxious or ignored, those feelings are not the same as being historically oppressed or targeted by genocide. Denying the reality of slavery, the Holocaust, or indigenous genocide does not make a person's feelings more valid. It simply disconnects them from reality. What we are seeing is a mix of emotional reactions to a changing world and deliberate narratives pushed by those who profit from division rather than actual evidence. We must remain bold and stand by the facts of history, regardless of how uncomfortable they may be for some to hear. Feel free to do your own research. Indigenous people have been here for decades. They were the first peoples here during Jesus. Long before us, there is no way that Columbus discovered anything. They were here before any of us for decades. White nationalists were not here either, Romans were. Please feel free to follow, subscribe, comment, like, and share. This helps you to stay connected to me, and it helps me to remain here creating more content for you. Thank you, love always, Maria DC Santiago.